束がある。こいつを倒すこと、それが俺のラストミッションなんだ。 ULTRAMAN.
There are about a dozen Ultraman films, and out of all of them, Ultraman the Next may be the best one. A majority of the Ultraman films produced so far have simply been tie-ins. They do very little to contribute anything fresh or special to the franchise. Don't get me wrong, Ultraman the Next is also technically a tie-in for Ultraman Nexus, but unlike all the other tie-ins, Ultraman the Next breaks conventions by doing a complete reimagining and telling a story that works on its own merits and that doesn't service other movies, shows, or any other media. So, do the end results make this a great film? Let's find out. Like I said before, one of the things that Ultraman the Next does best is that it tells its own standalone story that reimagines the character and the franchise. So you don't have any obligation to watch the original Ultraman show or any iteration to understand this movie. The film is about a pilot named Maki, who is forced to abandon his dream job of being a military pilot in order to spend more time with his son, who is suffering from some kind of illness. On Maki's last mission, he collides with a giant red orb of light that gives him the power to transform into Ultraman. The Japanese military then arrests Maki against his own will in order to lure a monster codenamed the One. Apparently, the One senses Ultraman's presence and wants to kill him, I guess. It is eventually revealed by Sarah, the leading scientist, that the One is actually her fiancé, Udo. While investigating a UFO crash in the ocean, Udo got infected by a blue luminous body which turned him into the One. I'm pretty sure you can imagine what happens by this point. Sarah and Maki find the One, Maki transforms into Ultraman, and they fight. Some of the characters are fairly decent. In the past, many of the leading characters were driven to save the world simply on the belief that it was the right thing to do. In this film, however, all the characters are driven by their personal demons. Maki is fighting for his son, Sarah is trying to correct her own mistakes, and that's pretty much the only characters with significant arcs. I mean, obviously the movie doesn't have only two characters. There are others, like Maki's son, who thinks very highly of his father and feels guilty that Maki gave up his dream for him. And then there's the mother, who obviously cares and loves for her son, but she comes off as extremely distant with Maki. If she has any love or care for her husband, she hardly shows it. Except this one scene where she tells her husband that every time she sees him off to work, it makes her happy. This is very ambiguous. It almost comes off like she's admitting that she loves it when he's not around, but the actual sentiment behind this is that she's actually happy that he's leaving to continue his dream job. If Maki looks familiar, it's because he was the lead in 1992's Godzilla vs. Mothra, a film where he also played a father, although in that film, he played a very shitty father. In this film, he plays the total opposite. If you're a parent or family person, you might sympathize with his plight, but Maki feels like a character we've seen done before. I feel that Sarah should have been the lead character that becomes Ultraman. It would have added additional conflict and emotional weight to her decisions, since she would be the one that has no choice but to kill her fiancé. That struggle is still in the film, but it's not as strong or effective as it tries to be. I personally love the design of this Ultraman, and I'm very disappointed that this design didn't influence later incarnations, with the exception of Ultraman Nexus, of course. If Hollywood ever makes an Ultraman movie, I hope they make their Ultraman look similar to this one. As far as the reinvention of Ultraman goes, I feel like the filmmakers played it too safe. He has a brand new design that strays far from past, traditional designs, but the character is still the same. Ultraman is still a protector, he's still a martial artist, and he still has his iconic Spacium Ray. But the movie does not explore this Ultraman's origins, background, or anything that would get us interested in him as a character. The same applies to the One. We have no idea where he comes from, what he is exactly, or what his plans are. We just assume he's evil because the movie says so. It would have been way more interesting if there were more scenes of Maki communicating with Ultraman. Ultraman could have learned about Earth and humanity through Maki, and Maki could have learned more about Ultraman in his home world and learned more about the One through Ultraman. The monster battles look great. If you're one of those fans who's only in it for the action, then the last 30 minutes will not disappoint you. I mean, it ain't no fast-paced Hong Kong style fight scene, but it gets the job done. Even if there are some CG effects that look questionable or outright bad. I like and dislike the soundtrack at the same time. I like the soundtrack because it has some great cues here and there. I especially love the new theme for Ultraman, which itself is a reimagining of the original 1966 Ultraman theme. The soundtrack has a very contemporary rock vibe to it, and that's half of the reason why I dislike parts of the soundtrack. A few rock tracks are okay, but then the soundtrack adds guitars at the most inappropriate moments. Some of the rock tracks do not match what's playing on screen. Take a look at this scene for example. Now let's see how different it would be if we add a more appropriate track. Overall, Ultraman the Next is a fairly decent film. While the film breaks conventions of the Ultraman franchise, it's still nothing too special. The best way I can describe Ultraman the Next is that it's the Doctor Strange of Ultraman movies. It's fun and enjoyable, but it's nothing we haven't already seen before. Would I recommend this to anyone trying to get into Ultraman? Yes, I would. It may not be the greatest thing in the world, but it's definitely a lot better than a majority of the Ultraman films where they've practically become toy commercials. I award Ultraman the Next 2.5 stars out of 4.